Lesson 7, misleading graphs. Let's go through the solutions for misleading graphs. And if you haven't watched this video, I highly recommend you watch it. It's very interesting. All right, which graph is misleading here? Well, graph A makes it look like the amount of cherries collected was really, really low compared to the amount of bananas collected. And that's because these cherries are much smaller than the cherries over here. And they're much smaller than the bananas, much smaller than the apples. So it makes it look like less cherries were collected, when in reality, 1, 2, 3, 4 images of cherries are here, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So really, the fruit collected for each fruit was exactly the same. But because they made these images really small, it makes it look like far less cherries were collected. And also, the apples are the same size as this nice graph over here, but they're not spaced out as evenly as the bananas are. So we should be spacing out our images in a picture graph in exactly the same way for every category. So bananas, apples, and cherries, they should all be evenly spaced so that you can keep up with how many more there are in one row. So spacing is important, and also size. So because the spacing and the size in this graph is not consistent, it's very misleading. So graph A is misleading. Okay, so these graphs are looking at bowling scores. And from what we can see in graph A, it looks like Terry over here she's doubling Mia's score, and she's almost doubling Diana's score. It looks like Terry's absolutely smashing the other two. But if we zoom in and look at Terry's actual score, well, Terry got 125 and Diana got 119. So she's actually pretty close. It's only going to take one more strike to knock Terry out. So that's really misleading because it makes it look like Terry is, well ahead of the other two. But in reality, if we had a y-axis like this starting at 0, because this y-axis over here starts at 108, and that's what makes it misleading. If we had it starting at 0, you can see all of the scores are actually pretty close. They're all sitting at around 120. So graph A is misleading because it makes it look like there's a much bigger gap between the players than there really is. And it's very similar with question 3. Graph 2 makes it look like a score of 150 is more than double a score of 120. But we know 150 is not double 120. 150 is actually quite close to 120. It's only 30 more. So this is actually a much more accurate graph. And this graph would have started at 0 on the y-axis, whereas this one clearly did not start at 0. If it starts at 0, we can see exactly how large this is in comparison to this. So graph 2 is misleading here because 150 is not more than double 120. So this graph shows how much money Japan invests in some countries. So how is this graph misleading? Well, let's try and read the graph. How much more money is Japan investing in the UK compared to Australia? How much more? Well, we have absolutely no idea because we have no values over here on our y-axis. We don't have any understanding of how much money this represents. We need to know how much, because if this is only worth $1, then it's not really that significant at all, is it? If Japan's giving $1 extra to the UK than they are to Australia, I don't think anyone's really that interested in that. If it represents billions of dollars, then that's a pretty massive, really significant change. So we need to know exactly how much money this represents. So we need a y-axis, but there's no scale on the vertical axis. So graphs are sometimes used to mislead people and not tell the story as it really is. A company presented the following line graph to show its profits over the year. What impression does this graph give? Okay, so we've got the months of the year down here, and we've got the profit in thousands of dollars over here. So in thousands of dollars, wow. And it starts right at the bottom here, and then it goes up all the way to the top, up to $41,000 over the course of 1 year. So that looks like they're really, they made a lot of profit over that year, doesn't it? They really increased in profit over the course of the year. So what impression does the graph give? It doesn't give the impression that they slowly made more profit. It gives the impression that they made huge profits from January to December. What is misleading about this graph? Well, it looks like they made huge profits from January to December, but if we take a closer look at the y-axis, we see that it doesn't start at zero. It starts at $40.1 thousand. So it's already starting really close to $41,000. And the amount of money that they made from January to December, the extra profit that they made, is just $41,000 minus $40.1 thousand. So they actually only made an extra $900 over the course of the year, which isn't that much, but it looks like a lot because the y-axis is not starting at zero. Sorry, the vertical axis, not the y-axis. Now, why do you think the company would present this misleading graph? Well, it's not because it's the most accurate. It's definitely not accurate. It's not because it's the only way this information could be presented. They could have easily made a y-axis that started at zero, and then they would have had a graph that increased much more gradually and was more accurate. Is it so people think they're doing a great job and making lots of money? Yeah, that's the reason why they do it. Okay, so what is misleading about this graph? Is it that the horizontal axis goes up by different amounts? Well, let's check. Horizontal axis is here, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, that seems good. Is it that the vertical axis goes up by different amounts? So 2, 4, so that should be 6, but it's 8. So yep, that's going up by different amounts. This only went up by 2, and this went up by 4, but it took the same amount of grid units here. So really, this should have gone up another 2 units. So it should be a lot steeper here, but it makes it look like a lot less happened and there was a lot less change. And then here we've got from 8 to 16, so that's another 8. So this really should have gone up another 8 units in that space. So this graph should be a lot steeper than it is. So the problem here is that the vertical axis goes up by different amounts. All right, what's misleading about this graph? So this is a graph about Dante's spending, and it says that he spent 40% of his budget, I'm assuming, on lunch, or 40% of his spending is spent on lunch, but this section of the sector graph clearly takes up more than 50% of the graph, doesn't it? Because it's more than half of the circle. Half would be a semicircle, and this is taking up more than that. But how can it be taking up more if it's only supposed to represent 40%? So that's a bit whack. If we add them up, the percentages are all going to be out of whack. So we've got 40% here, 30% there, so that's 70%. And then 10% here, so that should be 80%. But a sector graph should show you 100%, but it only adds up to 80. So it's used percentages, they need to add to 100%, but they don't. Okay, what's misleading about this graph? So this is showing ticket prices for basketball games as the years go on. Now, the ticket price is over here on the vertical axis. So we're really interested in how tall or how large these balls are in the vertical direction, okay? We want to know how tall they are. But because they're a circle shape or a sphere shape, it actually gets just as big on the horizontal axis as well. And it makes it look like it's much bigger because, yeah, sure, this ball here is about double the size of this ball, but it actually, as a circle, the shape is more than double this size because it's also double in this direction, in the horizontal direction. So the use of a round image is not a very accurate representation of the ticket prices. They should have used a more vertical image so that it was really just representing a change in vertical height, not horizontal height, because that's misleading. It makes it look like the ticket price is much larger than it actually is. So the basketball in 2021 is visually much larger than the others and gives the appearance that it is significantly bigger than it should be.